Welcome to another shoot of the Glaser Group. Today we're going to talk about everything that has to do with the buying process. And with me today is Elisa Negro Martínez from Martínez Echevarría. Elisa, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me.
To start, can you talk a little bit about yourself and about the company you work for, Martínez Echevarría? What are they about? What is it?
Yes, I'm Elisa. I'm a lawyer at Martínez Echevarría Law Firm. Martínez Echevarría is a multidisciplinary law firm that is providing legal advice from 1993. We provide advice on all the files of the law, but in this part of Spain, in Costa del Sol, probably the strongest area is the real estate department. We have offices all over the Costa del Sol, from Malaga to Soto Grande, and we have also offices in other cities of Spain, such as Madrid, and also in Portugal.
So, Martínez Echevarría, one of the biggest, or the biggest in Andalusia, and a very well-known legal company on the Costa del Sol. Let's talk a little bit further and let's give the clients some information about how the buying process goes here. And let's start with the beginning. A client has seen a property that they like. What legal documents are required to have to even start selling and buying properties here on the Costa del Sol?
Okay, well, selling and buying a property in the Costa del Sol in Spain involves a specific set of legal documents. It is crucial to have all these documents prepared before starting commercializing the property to ensure that the transaction is going to be smoothly. One of the most important documents is the title deed by which the owner acquired the property. So this document is provided to the buyer lawyer, and along with a land registry extract, not a simple, which has to be updated. The land registry extract includes some important information regarding the property, a description of the property, who is the owner of the property, and one of the most important things to have into consideration that is if the property has any liens or encumbrances, I mean a mortgage or any kind of seizures. Apart from that, it is important to request to the seller the first occupancy license, licencia de primera ocupación, which certify that the property has been duly built and according to the urban planning law.
Yeah.
Could happen that some properties in the area doesn't count with this license, and in these cases we conduct a due diligence, an urban due diligence, to determine what is the reason why this property doesn't have this license, and in this case we need a certificate from the town hall stating that the property doesn't have any urban planning proceeding. Other important documents are the energetic performance certificate, additionally a certificate from the town hall stating that the property doesn't have any debts regarding the council tax, and the same with the community of owners. We also recommend to request the bylaw of the community of owners, because sometimes this bylaw includes some restrictions regarding, for example, short-term rentals or any periods in which it is forbidden to do any works.
Yeah, that's very general here. Of course, July and August. A lot of communities don't like to have big building companies in to do reforms, etc.
Yeah, and also the minutes of the last meeting of owners to be sure that there is no extra fees approved for any works in the community. These are the main documents that we normally request to the seller.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's quite a lot of work.
This is why I said that it is important to have this information before starting to commercialize a property and to ensure that everything is in order to avoid any potential
problems and delays probably, because you'll probably see that not everything always is very prepared and has everything ready. I mean, I sometimes see properties for sale with no information about the EB, the basura, the community fees, because
at the end of the day, this is time, and this implies delays in the process. So
now we're talking about a little bit the buying and the selling. One of the very common questions that we have, what the tax implications, for example, are for EU, non-EU people if they start selling properties, because not every country, like for example the Netherlands, we do not have the tax payment on the profits when we sell a house. We just take everything and put it in a new property. But that's completely different here, isn't it?
yeah, here for the seller, if we are talking for taxes that imply that has to face the seller, we need to differentiate if the seller is a resident in Spain or a non-resident.
Yeah.
This means that if the seller is a resident in Spain because he spends more than 183 days here, he has to declare the capital gain in his Spanish personal income tax, which is filed the year after the sale. Okay, so this capital gain is calculated as the difference between the sale price and the purchase price, and he can consider all the costs, all the expenses related to these transactions, which makes the capital gains lower. Okay. Also, the seller has to face the plusvalia, which is a local tax to be payable to the town hall. Okay, and this tax tax the increase of the value of the plot of land where the property is located.
Yeah.
If the seller is a non-resident in Spain, it is necessary to proceed and to make some withholdings in the sale price. 3% of the sale price has to be withheld from the price, and this amount is paid by the buyer to the Spanish tax authorities on behalf of the seller as a payment on account of the capital gain tax. Okay, if the seller has 4 months to file his non-resident tax return, and if the capital gain amount is lower than this 3%, he can request the reimbursement of the difference.
And if it's more?
Has to pay the difference, And also the plusvalia. If the seller is a non-resident, the plusvalia has also to be withheld from the sale price, and the buyer pays this amount to the town hall on behalf of the seller.
And the reason that the buyer is paying this is to secure the money?
Yeah, of course. It's to secure the seller pays.
He doesn't inherit the debt.
Yeah, because as he is a non-resident, he can go, and for the Spanish tax authorities, it would be difficult to find him.
Yeah, so that answers one of the questions about the plusvalia, because a lot of people always wonder, like, plusvalia, what is it?
Yeah.
Why do I need to pay this? It's got nothing to do with me. You pay it, but it's being used from the money from the people who are selling the property.
The thing is that for some sellers, it's difficult to understand that in Spain we have, on the one hand, the capital gain tax. And other hand, the plusvalia. Plusvalia, as I explained, is a local tax and is payable to the town hall. And if the seller sells the property by a sale price lower than the purchase price, there is no plusvalia.
No.
In this case, he doesn't to pay this plusvalia to the town hall. This is good to know.
Okay, and if we talk, for example, the difference between residents and non-residents, EU and non-EU. I mean, for example, percentage-wise.
For the sale of a property for non-residents, the tax rate is the same. It's 19%, regardless it is a resident in an EU country or a resident in a non-EU country. The difference is, for example, when renting a property, the tax rate is different. Because for resident in an EU country, a tax rate is 19%, and for resident in a non-EU country, it is 24%. But for the sale, it's the same, 19% in both cases.
If we talk, for example, about the legal responsibilities of the buyer and the seller in a process. So say, for example, I'm selling my house. What are my responsibilities? What are the responsibilities of the buyer? Who pays what?
Well, here it is important to say that, of course, we as lawyers ensure or protect our client.
Yeah.
So depending on our client, it's the buyer or the seller, obviously we protect or we include some clauses or others.
Yeah.
So, for example, for the buyer, it's very important to certify that the property is free of liens and encumbrances. Also, it's important to confirm that the property is free for any occupants.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, we always include some clauses in the private purchase contract in which we said, okay, the vendors confirm that the property is free of any occupants, that the property is free of any charges. But if my client is the seller, probably what I include in this contract is, okay, the buyer confirmed that he has visited the property and that he agrees with the property as it is.
Yeah.
So
the quality and maintenance, etc.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, each party is responsible of those that had stated in the deed or in the private purchase contract.
So it's also that there is not one standard deed, there is not one standard contract. Everything can vary depending on the sale, the commitment from the lawyers.
The deed is more standard, but for example, the private purchase contract, the ARRAs, can be modified depending on the kind of property or depending on its transaction.
Yeah. If we're talking about clauses that we can add and keep away, is there anything specific that you think is always very important to have in it? Or
well, yeah, as I have explained, that the property is being transferred free of any charges and encumbrances, that there is no occupants in the property, that the property has all the license. At the end of the day, these three for me are the most important.
One of the things that I know, for example, if we start buying a property for one of our clients, we start with a reservation form, we do a deposit, and we articulate like, okay, this is the deal. We're gonna buy property for this price in this time period. We have bought the furniture and blah, blah, blah. Everything is included in it. Later on, we go to the ARRAS, to the purchase contract, and that is literally when it comes down to the nitty-gritty little bit. How do we work, for example, with the deposits that has already been paid before? How does that work with the ARRAs, and how is that happening with the payment? Because if I buy the property, I'm going to put the reservation deposit in my lawyer's account, while the ARRAs go straight to the seller.
One important thing to bear in mind is that we always recommend our clients to include a clause in the reservation form that says that this deposit is conditioned to conducting a due diligence, a positive due diligence. So, for example, if a client pays a deposit to the agency or to her lawyer, he always needs to sign this deposit, but with a clause stating that this is conditioned to having a positive due diligence. And if something arises, because at this moment we don't know if the property has any problem or it misses any document. So if any problem arises or any document is missing, we can then go back and receive the money back. So the steps are, first of all, to sign this reservation form. Then, if it is a non-resident, to get the NIE, which is compulsory to grant the public deed. In the meantime, we conduct the due diligence. Okay, we request all the documents to the vendor's lawyer. We analyze it and we draft a due diligence, a legal, tax, and urban planning due diligence. And when everything is clear, we prepare the private purchase contract, the ARRAs. The private purchase contract details everything, okay? Who are the parties in the transaction, description of the property, what is the price, and what is the deadline to transfer the property. Upon signature of this document, a 10% of the sale price is transferred. Okay. And if in the event that the buyer decide not to proceed with the transaction with any force majeure cause, he loses the money.
Yeah.
But if the vendors refuse to complete the transaction, he must reimburse this amount to the buyer and other equal amount. So he must to double.
He loses the same amount of money as well.
Yeah. Once the PPC, the private purchase contract, is signed, it depends if the buyer needs a mortgage or not. The process continues, and we start conversation with the notary to prepare the sale and purchase deed, and everything is ready to sign it.
Okay. Well, one of the things I like to go back on a little bit is the reservation contract.
Mm-hmm.
And what I always find very interesting, what you just said, is you sign the reservation contract and then we start checking all the documents. While sometimes people find it very scary. Oh, I already need to do a down payment, but what if the property is not legal? Or what if there is an outstanding debt? How do we work with that? And actually, they have zero risk as long as we put in, I think, that if it's not okay, you get your money back.
That's the point. The reservation agreement at the end of the day is like it's a document for the seller to take the property out of the market. Because otherwise the seller can continue, commercializing the property and find another buyer for the property. So this is the aim of this contract. The amount paid at this stage is not that big, and obviously the most important is to include that there exists a condition. After conducting the due diligence, we detect that there exists any problem, you can back out.
The sale is null and void, you get back your money and move on.
Yeah.
And time-wise, say for example, I call you, Elisa, hey, I've got good news. One of my clients have very much interest in a property. We have negotiated a deal. How long from this moment on to the transfer at the notary is it about to?
Well, it can vary depending on the circumstances of the buyer. If the buyer has an IE and if the buyer doesn't need a mortgage, everything can be done in 1 week.
Okay.
But normally the buyer needs an IE, which can take 3 weeks because the availability are not.
And appointments difficult at this point.
Are difficult, And so if the buyer needs an IE but is a cash buyer and he doesn't need any financing, we can do everything more or less in 1 month.
Okay.
If it requires financing, could take 2 months.
Yeah.
This is more or less the media,
And if we're talking, say, for example, about this, say I want to sell my villa.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a difference when I'm selling to somebody who's a resident here, a Spanish national, or a foreign people from America or China or whatever? Is the process all the same? Is there something I should keep in mind that is different? Or
if the seller is a foreign...
No, if the seller is just, I'm the seller and I want to sell my property to an American person or a Spanish person, is there a difference in the process, or is that difference to selling the same regardless?
The only difference is the need of an IE, of a Spanish identification number.
Yeah.
If the buyer is a foreign, he needs a Spanish identification number, but for the rest of the process is the same, because even taxes for the buyer are the same if it is a resident in Spain or a non-resident in Spain. The property transfer tax is the same and the process is basically the same. Yeah.
Okay, so that doesn't really matter. And if we're talking, for example, about the obligations that as a seller you have to the buyer with regards to internet or water connections or the whole trends over, for example, I just sold a property in Alarin, and the owner thought he was obliged to clean the septic tank. What is all true or not or necessary?
Well, regarding the utilities of the property, the seller has to confirm that everything is working.
Yeah.
He has not to cancel, the contract. Everything needs to be working, water, electricity, and obviously everything must be paid. And for example, regarding the community of owner fees or the council tax, what normally is included in the public deed is that the cost of these expenses are paid on a proportion, For example, if you are buying a property the 5th of May, the seller has to pay council tax from the 1st of January to the 5th of May, and the buyer, as new owner, from this date until the 31st of December. This is the most important things regarding the utility.
Should the buyer or the seller be busy with this, or do you, as the lawyers?
Yeah, the lawyers, we do this on behalf of the buyer. We do all the change in the, of the ownership of the contract.
Yeah.
The water, the electricity. We communicate also to the town hall that the details of the new owners, and the same with the community of owners. We communicate to the administrator the details of the new owners, what is its bank account to direct debit all the payments in this new bank account. We deal with this.
Okay, so as a client, as a buyer or a seller, you can just lean back, relax, and
at least us, we deal with everything. Even in some cases, in the most of the cases, the client grants us a power of attorney, and we do all the process on his behalf.
And I think that is one of the very good things about Martínez Echevarría.
Yeah.
The client can say, Maarten, I want to buy this.
Yeah.
We come with the client, we arrange power of attorney, and from there on, they can just sit back and relax.
Yeah.
You guys keep up to date with them about
and
where.
Of course, we require authorization for each of the steps.
Yeah.
We explain everything to the client, but he can be aware that it's going to be in the best hands.
And everything is going to be taken care of. He can pick up the keys and start enjoying the property. And talking about picking up the keys, how does that look? The whole transferring of ownership, because it's not like, hey, we go to the notary today and I've got all my documents ready tomorrow.
Well, yeah, as I explained before, since we have the private purchase contract signed, we start preparing everything with the notary. We send all the documents to the notary, and we draft the sale and purchase deed. We determine a date and a time to go there. We send to the buyer the breakdown of the amount that he needs to pay to the seller in this moment, because sometimes, as I explained also before, sometimes there are some withholdings from the price, So we explain the buyer what is the amount that he needs to transfer to our client's account normally, or if he prefers, he can issue the checks by himself. So the date of completion, we go to the notary with the checks. Sometimes we do a bank transfer. It depends on the seller also. And the date of completion, both parties sign the sale and purchase deed. The vendors give the keys to the buyer, and the buyer gives the checks or the bank transfer to the vendor. And after that, everything is done, but this deed has to be filed with the land registry. So taxes has to be paid, the property transfer tax or the VAT, depending if it is a off-plan property or a resale. And after the taxes are paid, the property is filed with the land registry, which usually takes 3 weeks. And after 3 weeks, we have all the documents ready, and we provide them for the buyer, to the client.
And now you were just talking about resales and off-plan properties, and that there is a different tax structure in that. How is that exactly? Because it can be confusing sometimes for the people.
Yeah, it is sometimes confusing. If you are buying a resale property, you have to pay the property transfer tax, which is a 7% of the sale price.
Okay.
always considering that the sale price is higher than the valor de referencia, which is the value that the cadastral give to the property. So this is for the resale properties. If you are buying an off-plan property, the buyer has to pay the VAT, the value-added tax, at a 10% tax rate on the sale price, plus stamp duty land tax at a 1.2% of the sale price.
Okay, so there is a difference of more
Yeah,
than
of course.
4.2%
Yeah.
in taxes
Yeah.
between new build, off-plan,
Yeah.
and the resale department.
Yeah.
Okay, wow, thank you. I don't know if there is anything that you think we've missed or that you think is very important to tell to the people.
I think we have talked about the most important milestones and the most important things to have into consideration.
Perfect. Elisa, thank you very much
Thank
for your time.
you.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank
and
you.
We'll see you soon.
See you. Bye bye.